Hartwig, thank you very much for inviting. It's times where individual positions are paramount. We are easy to discuss what differentiates us, and we're pretty poor in discussing what unites us. And I find the collective basis of architecture throughout the series that you make like really a massive contribution to the professional debate. So it's very important what you do these days, I think. Raum, you gave us. Yeah, no, that's the room. You do, but it's the room that comes together. Raum. I thought of it when I prepared it. For me, Raum was not about space, but it was literally about room, about the rooms, about the defined space. And I thought I'd bring you the Leiden Town Hall as a projecting case to perhaps elaborate on a few themes. The history of the Leiden Town Hall is a complex one. The town hall started somewhere in the 14th century with the development of a whole series of rooms, and these rooms had specific functions. One for gathering, one for trade, one for law court, and these rooms grew as a conglomerate of spaces along the Breestraat, which is one of the central streets in the historic center, a little bit elevated from the river that runs in the middle of the town. By the 16th century, that conglomerate of rooms had grown, and Leiden was very prospering by the time, and they decided that they need a facade in front of the rooms. So actually, first the rooms grew, and after that, the facade was designed. It was by a local carpenter, Van Es, who designed it, but largely influenced by the works of Wingender in Haarlem. And as you see, it also somehow shows a little bit this conglomerate. There are different entrances, there are even different parts in this facade. There's a stair leading up to a main room, which was the main gathering room by the time. And after this facade, which is by the day of today the longest Renaissance facade, or the widest Renaissance facade that we have in the Netherlands, the town hall continued to grow and grow, and grew actually occupying the entire building block by the end of the 19th century. On February 12, 1929, it must have been very cold. Somebody left on a stove, and the entire building block burned down. And the only thing that could be saved by the firemen was the facade. So there's this kind of incredible inversion in the history of this building, and it's shown dramatically in this image. Up the river, which is low, the street, which is a full floor higher, the saved facade along the street, and the burned down building block in the back. This was the kind of given point for a competition, an architectural competition. First, Dudok made a proposal for this site. He actually just copied the Hilversum Town Hall, put it behind. He says, like, beautiful, let's do it. They were not really happy with that, and after that they organized a competition with a lot of debate that was inevitably won by Cornelis Blauw, a somewhat obscured architect in Dutch history, but he started out with a kind of Amsterdam school brick-orientated architecture, and then around the 1930s converted to a kind of classical handwriting, but in brick, kind of melee of architectural styles. And he had a very kind of classical opinion on how to do the town hall. And when we were examining the project and preparing our proposal, it was the key to the project for us was understanding it from a typological point of view. And I think the relation between room and typology is something to discuss, because both are very fundamental architectural terms. So, on the left-hand side, the town hall and the building block. And on the right-hand side, after the fire, so the tabula rasa that Blauw had to start from. And giving his kind of classical education, he projected a Beaux-Arts town hall with 2 courts. It's the type that you find all over Europe. He projected that basically behind the existing facade. And then through a series of manipulations, he built up this town hall. The first thing he did, he cut open one of the courts and turning it into a town hall square, which had never been there, which was a kind of new addition by the town hall to the city, because it just used to be a perimeter block. Leaving a kind of court as an antidote to the square, and positioning, let's say, actually and centrally the entrance. The next step that he undertook was he started to cut up the volume in smaller volumes. Actually a series of houses almost, based on that same typological organization in order to make it fit with the surrounding urban tissue. Organizing also the square to overcome the height difference between the street and the riverside, and then organizing programmatically all the, let's say, formal spaces confronting the town hall square, and let's say all the office spaces and back of the houses and all the kind of secondary rooms around the court, except for the second floor where all the rooms of the mayor and the elderly men are actually facing that historic facade. So it's a manipulation, and in its essence, it's a typological form, and this is the building just after construction. So you see the kind of cut up situation into smaller houses to match, let's say, the surrounding urban landscape. The kind of very peculiar position of the tower in this kind of corner on the court. It's also clear, this height difference. On the second floor, which is this floor up from the street with the main stair, are all the, let's say, monumental and most representative spaces. But he introduced a new entrance on the town hall square, which gives this kind of very strange sectional problem that all the representative spaces are on the second floor in this building. So in its ground typology, it makes sense. And section-wise, this kind of very strange history is all the time present in this building when you work on it. He clad the outside of that building in a kind of classical brick architecture, somewhere between Delftse School and more classical notions of it. And the interesting thing is that he built an extremely modern building. It's a full concrete construction behind it. So this is the, let's say, the concrete construction. And on the outside, it's cladded in brick to fit the urban surroundings and to resonate with the Renaissance facade. And on the interior, he thought of a completely different way of cladding that same construction. So we're looking at a complex history, we're looking at a concrete construction with a brick cladding on the outside, and this is the main city room with the marriage room in the back. For Dutch standards, it's an unbelievable space. It's like quite amazing first time I entered it. It's also in a very, very good condition. And yes, there's a kind of fascinating contrast between inside and outside, but there's also an incredible clear hierarchy of rooms that Blau handed to us. There's also a second layer in this history. So Blau cladded this interior with a whole set of marbles, stucco work, very elaborated woodworks in it. But he never actually saw the building finished. He died in 1947 and the building was unfinished. So his former employee and later partner, Zwiers, took over. But Zwiers had like a completely different conception of what the representation of space should be. So for example, the council room all of a sudden has a completely different reading to it. There's a different architectural handwriting going on within the same envelope. So that's, let's say, layer number 3 in the history of this building that comes. A very classical situation with the elderly man and the mayor on the stage, and let's say the more democratic representation on the lower floors, sense of hierarchy. When we started to work on the building, these notions of these layers were very important. You used the word palimpsest halfway your lecture. This is, for us, when we were discussing what's actually our role here, was you have to read this building as a palimpsest. This is like text written over another, where the one influences the other. And it's actually very beautifully caught in this image. You know, it's the light through the stained glass of the 16th century facade. I look at a room designed by Blau, but I'm standing in a room designed by Zwier. So and they're all, let's say, authentic. They're all original. So it's a difficult moment as an architect to enter such a building and to start working on it. And yet it was important to do that. Throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, renovations had been done, which were not quite so successful. So, for example, an elevator was kind of composed on the end of the corridor as its kind of main piece. A commissioning room was kind of filled in an existing void space, but way too low and lacked any form of representation, whereas in the democratic process is a very important room. And I think very importantly, this kind of beautiful court was covered by a glass roof, and in the end, plastic plants and trees represented something of a garden in the middle. So there's a huge contrast. So when we entered, we found actually this existing beautiful 16th century facade. We found this fantastic interior and an intact outside. But for us, the question as architect was, how do we act within this? The set of demands we were giving for this renovation was, okay, renew all the installations. They're all outdated, you know. And it's when you work on reuse of buildings, that's like the first question that you get. It's a simple question. It has like huge impact on these kind of buildings. So a massive amount of work is done to reorganize all installations, and they're all invisible. And you know, you spend like years working on something that you don't see, and I enjoy that very, very much, to be honest. The other thing was we had to add new programs. There were programs by the time this building was designed that were not there. So kind of more informal working cafe for people from the municipality. This commissioning room that we saw, which was kind of built in, but without any formal representation, needed a new position. But I think most importantly also, the building really lacked a kind of representative reception or a kind of welcome to people, you know, to enter that building. So these were questions on the table on the programmatic side. The nature of these kind of projects is that you really go room by room. And of course, we were very happy with this idea of the typology as a guiding principle on how we could deal with those rooms. The nature is also of, you know, you work on places in the building, but it's sometimes like acupuncture, changing the flow of energy or the flow of goods or the flow of people in the building. Sometimes it's kind of creating a new space, sometimes just fixing a small problem. It's never like a big project, these kind of renovations. You are working everywhere, and at the same time, you know, it's not like a new project where you draw everything. So the red represents, for example, on the ground floor where we intervened. And in the section where you see this kind of oddity of an entrance and the main room on the second floor. So this is a section through this council room. So there was a whole series of interventions that we made, but I think they were important in this notions of rooms and space. And Blau handed us a set of rules that we could follow, that we could interpret it, that we could work with, and that you know, informed us in the steps that we had to take. It was sometimes repair, sometimes adding, sometimes changing. I get to that as a working method. But the first thing we said, we have to restore this court. So we took off the glass roof, reinstalled it as a garden, and kind of opened up the building again to this kind of antidote of the busy town hall square to a kind of, and this is just after finishing the green and putting the green into it. We're actually just at the moment finishing this building as a kind of antidote to it. So this was mere reconstruction of the original space. Sometimes it was also liberating doors, to have like the secondary routes, like the enfilade between the rooms, to open them again. And within the rooms fitting in these kind of installations, but leaving, let's say, this tectonic reading of beams and columns visible, finding a way how to put a carpet in it. It's simple questions, but in the kind of experience of rooms within this building, they proved to be of great importance. Of course, kind of opening up that corridor, getting rid of the elevator, putting that window back again, so that this kind of the original typological essence of that space was kind of reinstored. Small interventions, but meaningful, sometimes bigger, you know. We had to bring in a new staircase house for fire reasons, but also for safety reasons, that people could go around in this building without exiting kind of safety zones within the building. So how does one make an entrance throughout an existing wall? And how does one make a space for a stair that was kind of noted before? I think that's important. These are small interventions, but done with great care in relation to the building. When it gets to the typology of rooms, there were certain exceptions. There was a demand for a bigger working space, which was not available in the building. We found that in the roof structure of the building. So we were able to remove all the installations from these attics. We removed the floors in the attics and actually took the most minimal finish we could think of for this concrete construction, which was a very simple white paint, to unify it with a small painted socle. So kind of minimal cladding, minimal embellishment, and kind of for once showing actually this beautiful construction that's between both claddings in the rest of the building, which was never revealed. So the essence, for example, of this new space is that we revealed this concrete construction. Important was also to develop a material palette to answer all these small questions that came along. Plasterwork, stucco was of course at hand for the walls, but for example for the floors it was quite difficult because it had beautiful marble floors and we could absolutely not afford to get them if we would get the marble at all in this quality at this time. So we decided for terrazzo to kind of continue on the floors because it has the same shine, it has the kind of same color aspect to it. And of course with the messing lining in it and the differences of colors, we could answer the patterns of the floors and kind of work with these various importances of rooms. You know, very important rooms had very beautiful marble floors. And sometimes we had to add rooms to that important room. So what kind of flooring do you do to that? And patterns and material were kind of a very essential moment in the design process. So up above the original marble floor and below of it a kind of continuation in the terrazzo floor in the new spaces. It gave us a repertoire to work on floors. It gave us, similar with the stucco work, which I show later, a repertoire to work on the walls. So for example, this was a very essential drawing showing all the floors in the terrazzo on the ground floor, because we had to kind of extend those floors and extend them in their meaning. So where there was a former marbled flooring leading up to a stair, the floor was gone, but we repaired actually the original pattern in the terrazzo, but on the left it's a new pattern in terrazzo, and on the right it's also a new pattern in terrazzo, because they were never formal rooms. So we added those rooms to this more formal part of the building. You also see here the kind of lining in the plasterwork that we introduced to answer walls or cuts or the proportioning of the marble cladding, which was sometimes available on columns. You see this actually here. There's an original marble floor and an original marble cladding on the walls. The rest is new. So for example, these lines that kind of continue, united as a column, but leave the history of the place, so the palimpsest readable. You know, it's kind of minimal interventions, but within the spirit of this building. We reintroduced this double high space, removed the room that they built in between, and made it part of this kind of receptional area. So this space was completely new to the building. It looks like always been part of the building, but it's actually a completely new space. Typologically it was not there, but it fits perfectly in the typological arrangement. And we just had to fit it out with this new set of claddings and this kind of formalizing the space and make it fit within the organization of the building. From there, a view to the garden, something that was never there, but becomes available now within the town hall. This actually is my, I would say, favorite column in the project. It exactly shows where previous walls were standing, and it shows it in the architectural presence of the column, but it speaks about the history of the place actually. And it's a kind of, you come along these things in the project, you don't design them, to be honest. So, to conclude, Palimpsest in working on rooms. Typology as a guiding principle, and cladding as a guiding principle. And on palimpsest, B. Playfoot from the University of Hasselt at a certain moment handed me a notion. She says, if you take this idea of text and working on text as an architecture seriously, you might contemplate this idea of the translatio, imitatio, and emulatio as a way of working. And of course, there are, I say, the emulatio always been regarded as the highest, but actually as a way of working, it is interesting. You know, the translatio really as a realm of maintenance and repair, which is, I would say, 75% of the work that we did. That was really translatio. There is a point where you get to imitatio. You get to partial reconstruction of elements in order to hold the balance of the building. And there is this moment where you start to reinterpretate. So, and it's these are not absolute terms, but it's a very nice and gentle way to understand your own action within such buildings. And as in thinking of rooms, it might be a small but useful contribution. Thank you so much, Uwe.